Selling lies and buying time, killing people next in line. Lower class and social slime, they don't matter. Genocide, sick from water, sick from air. Making money, they don't care. Caesar shit, force of air. Fuck them back, it's only for they bomb. They shoot, they kill, they massacre, rape. They burn the kids, no one makes countries. Lie to your face, fight and die. Cause God forgives. Selling lies and buying time, killing people next in line. Lower class and social side, they don't matter. Genocide, sick from water, sick from air. Making money, they don't care. See their shit, force a bear. Fuck them back, that's only fair. They bomb, they shoot, they kill, they massacre, rape. They burn the kids, no one leaves countries. Lie to your face, fight and die, cause God forgives. Yeah. Coming back around again.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Ron Stevens. This is Rock the Boat, right here on UCY.TV, my favorite little online network, and I hope it's growing. Today's the 3rd of December, and it's actually a pretty pleasant day. It's not windy. It's about 5-6 above Celsius, and it's supposed to have a couple more warm days, and then 12 days of snow. So it looks like winter is sitting out on our doorstep waiting to come in, and we'll see if the weatherman's right. They normally are, so hopefully they're wrong again, and we don't get too much snow. But it is what it is, and if we get lots of snow, then it must be because of global warming, and if we get no snow at all, then it must be, of course, because of global warming, and if it's a really cold winter, it must be because of global warming, and if it's a real warm winter, well, then again, it must be because of global warming. How stupid is the population? Apparently pretty damn stupid, and that's unfortunate. I don't know how people get conned so easily. You know, I mean, we've been conned by some fairly big lies and some not so big lies, and you know, the global warming lie is it's a huge lie. I mean, if you sit down and you have to think about it critically. So you're telling me that this group of UN scientists, they're not even UN scientists, really. They're the ones that play with the data. They manipulate data. And, you know, that somebody could actually believe that a group of men and women could project out through their little computer data machines that over the course of the next 100 years, that if we don't give up all our rights and give up all our resources and the use of those said resources, that over the course of the next 100 years, it's not 100 years now. They've been yammering this since really the late 70s, early 80s. So we got, you know, basically 60 years that if we don't bow down and do exactly what the cabal wants us to do, that it will be our responsibility that the Earth implodes upon itself because of the possibility of a 2-degree centigrade rise in temperature. Now, who in the hell could possibly believe such a crock of nonsense? But you talk to people, and they seem to be accepting of it. Tell a big lie, repeat it often, until it becomes accepted and normal. We have the big lie about diversity, and which has caused all kinds of problems for all kinds of people. You know, I can't wait to run into one of these people, and they tell me that I'm in trouble because I said, "Oh, how are you doing today?" And they get mad at me because I didn't refer to them as they. I just can't wait. It's ludicrous. I remember back in the 80s, I was downtown and opened a door for a woman going into a store, and she turned around and chewed my face off. Now, I've always opened doors for people. I always open doors for old people. It's just showing some respect. But this particular lady turned around and just chewed my face off. I've been opening doors all my life for people, and all of a sudden I'm getting chewed out. And it kind of shocked me at first, but it turned out this was a feminist, and that a male would open a door for a female was just not acceptable. And she went on about, what do you think? I can't open the door by myself? And I going, man, this world's going for a dump. And it's just progressed along over the years. So now we have I find the whole LGBTQ thing completely silly, really. I mean, you look at these pride parades and you go, like, are these people all mentally ill or what? And apparently, because if you look in your drawers and whatever's in there is what you are, and you can't do anything about it. Now, why you would want to attempt to be something you're not is a sign that you feel inadequate, or you basically have some kind of a mental problem, and you can't deal with who you are. But it's not really their fault, okay? The group known as LGBTQ has been targeted, and they've been coerced, and they've been deceived, and they're being used as another fraction point of our society. And they don't seem to get it. And I don't know why they don't get it. They feel now that they're special. Well, you're only special in the fact that you're being used for nefarious purposes, because they don't give a damn about you. They use whatever they can use to destroy this society. And you play along like a bunch of fools. Why is it necessary to march buck naked or mostly naked down the streets of our cities and towns, in your face attitude to everybody else? You show no respect for anyone else, yet you want everyone to show respect to you. That doesn't work that way. Okay? Respect is reciprocal. And none of these groups, be it Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ, the Idle No More, or whatever other thing that they've kicked up, that anti-FA, all of these things are there to fracture the society, to turn the society against each other by empowering these little groups. And it's all set up, it's all constructed, it's all a fraud. And you people keep getting hooked into these frauds. Now, if you want change, if you want a better country, if you want to regain the moral values of men and women, then you're going to have to step forward. You can't just hide out at home and watch your TV and go, well, I'm just disgusted by that. What do you mean Black Lives Matter? Doesn't everybody's life matter? And that kind of rhetoric going on. The majority of the people, the vast, vast majority of the people in this and most other countries just remain silent. They don't want to get involved. They don't wish to participate. They just want everything to be okie dokie. And as they watch our nation spiral into Babylon, basically, Sodom and Gomorrah. And we have the Catholic Church to thank for that in Rome. You know, we're getting close. This is the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther and the start of the Reformation. But you don't see Martin Luther Day. You don't see International Day of the Reformation. You see International Day of everything else that's nefarious, that's being used to distract, deceive, and fracture. They have a day for everything, but they don't have a day for anything moral. So, you know, this is the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, when Luther went to Rome and went, what the what? This is a scam. And he pointed the scam out when he put his 95 irritants nailed it to the door of whatever church. And they dragged him to Rome and they wanted him to recant, because people were starting to question after this, because he offered them some knowledge. And they wanted him to recant what he was saying. And he basically used the same line I've been using for seems like ever now. When people come at me because they don't like what I'm saying, what Luther basically told the Church, the Vatican, Rome, was that, prove me wrong. If you can prove me wrong through the very scriptures that you use, then I'll recant. But if you can't, then I won't, because there's no need to. And he didn't. And then all hell broke loose. And it really kicked Rome in the teeth, the Vatican in the teeth, and Catholicism in the teeth. And then we ended up with Protestants. These are the protesters. And they managed to do that way back in the 1500s, when we didn't have any social media, we didn't have TVs, we didn't have radios, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have fax machines. And if it hadn't been for the Gutenberg press coming along about the same time or whatever, and getting a hold of a copy of what Luther was on about, it probably wouldn't have got much wouldn't have gained much traction. But because of that press, and they were pumping this information out, and it got in the hands of the so-called ordinary people, and they went, damn, this is a scam. And they didn't like being scammed, so they called out Rome. Rome didn't like being called out, so there was a lot of fighting and a lot of death and all this kind of stuff. But out of that came the Protestants. And for the longest time, Catholics couldn't hold political positions or any position of influence or power. I don't think they were allowed into the universities as teachers. They'd been called out. They were proven not to be who they said they were. They were proven to be deceivers, enslavers. And so this again is the 500th anniversary of Luther, but you don't hear anything about Luther, really, because it was a thorn in the side of those who want to rule the world, so you don't want to have anyone on Luther's side of this thing. But the Roman Catholic Church and the Vatican, Rome, and the Jews and the bankers and the lawyers and all that kind of stuff who want world power, it wouldn't be to their advantage to ramp Luther up again. So, the 1960s, they threw up Vatican II, and now, in the 500th anniversary of the Protestant movement, all of the churches that split from the Catholics are now entwined with the Catholics again, and entwined with the Vatican and the Pope, who just happened to be a Jesuit. Now, if that doesn't tell you there's something very nefarious going on, I don't know what would. If you haven't read the Jesuit Oath, look it up. Just get on your little keyboard there and Google Jesuit Oath. And if you read that, then you understand where you stand. And it ain't a pretty place. So now, after all these years, 500th anniversary of Luther, we now have the global church, the international church, it's all international. And it's all run by the same people, or the same groups of people that Luther kicked in the teeth 500 years ago. And all you have to do is look around. I mean, what Luther described in Rome is basically the same thing we're seeing now. Pedophilia, wickedness, and so on and so forth. So it's back. And it's time that we kick these nefarious dogs in the teeth once again. That's why I'm thinking we should have Reformation 2. The poor people who go to the churches, they've been deceived big time. I don't know how. Well, I do know how, because when I left the church, 70, somewhere in there, I just knew something in my gut. There was something bad wrong with this group of people now, or not the people. It's never the people, okay? It's what controls the people. You always have a controlling arm, regardless of where you are. It doesn't matter if it's your workplace. It doesn't matter if it's the legal system. It doesn't matter if it's the political system. There's always a controlling faction, an unseen controlling faction that is behind the scenes doing the manipulation. And they have their agents who manipulate people up front. And they're very good at it, obviously, because what's going on and being promoted in the churches today, you would wonder, how would anybody sit in a church when this garbage is being promoted? But they do. It's time to move the church forward. I hate that saying. But anyways, there's a book that was mentioned to me. They sent me a link, but it came up 404 or 40 whatever it is. So I went and looked it up, and it's a book. Where did that get to now? Okay, this is a copy. This is It was called The Nameless War, written by Archibald Ramsey. And it didn't do his life much good. But he stood up and ended up in jail. And he came from a fairly aristocratic family. But he got looking, he fought in World War I, and then he got looking at the rising towards World War II, and he got to looking at this thing, and he discovered that who's behind all this crap? Well, you heard the old saying, all war are banker wars or Jew wars. And so he got looking into it pretty close. And so I haven't had time to read the book yet. I read a bit of a synopsis on it. And he was a member of British Parliament, was arrested and imprisoned unjustly by an extension of Regulation 18B. Now, he's supposed to have parliamentary protection or whatever, but they took that away, I guess, and threw him in jail anyways. And when he did get out of jail, he went back to Parliament, but he didn't. I don't think he didn't run after that. There's been this is the original publisher's note, and there's only one review on this particular site, December 6, 2016, and it gives the book 5 stars, subject, great book, original publisher's note. Here's a story that people have said would never be written in our time. The true history of events leading to the Second World War, told by one who enjoyed the friendship and confidence of Mr. Neville Chamberlain during the critical months between Munich and September 1939. There has long been an official ban on books dealing with what Captain Ramsey calls the Nameless War, the conflict which has been waged from behind the political scene for centuries, which is still being waged and which very few are aware. The publishers of the Nameless War believe this latest exposure will do more than any previous attempt to break the conspiracy of silence. The present work, which much additional evidence and a fuller historical background, is the outcome of the personal experiences of a public figure who in the course of duty has discovered at first hand the existence of centuries of conspiracy against Britain, Europe, and the whole of Christendom. The Nameless War reveals an unexpected link between the major revolutions in Europe from King Charles, it's time to the abortive attempt against against Spain in 1936. One source of inspiration, design, and supply is shown to be common to all men, or all of them, excuse me. These resolutions in the World War of 1939 are seen to be integral parts of one and the same master plan. After a brief review of the forces behind the declarations of war and the worldwide arrests of many who endeavored to oppose them, the author describes the anatomy of the Revolutionary International machine. This machine which today continues to plan for supranational world power, the age of the messianic dream of international Jewry. It is the author's belief that the machine would break down without the support of its unwilling Jews and unsuspecting Gentiles, and he puts forward suggestions for detracting or detaching these elements. Which is, it's all what it is. This is part of the Nameless War, which is the Third World War, of which we are fully immersed in, and most people don't know it, don't get it, don't understand it, don't want to know it, don't want to understand it, don't want to get it. This is the Third World War, and, 3 strikes, you're out, folks. So the First World War was a setup to create an international body to rule the world, which was called the League of Nations. And what a lot of people don't understand is that in both world wars, the other attachment to the outcome of the wars was the creation of the State of Israel. And First World War, they didn't get what they wanted. They wanted America signing on to the League of Nations. They wouldn't, because they still had vivid memories of why they fought the War of Independence, and they had no intention of giving up any other hard-fought sovereignty. And but it was also about the creation of the State of Israel. And Israel was offered a place in North Africa. I don't recall which or where right now, but you can look that up. And so it failed, but it did get a start point. Canada was always right there because it's a British Jew-run, they call Canada a Judeo-Christian society. Well, Jews don't like Christians. And so if you put Judeo-Christian, you're putting the Jews in front of and above the Christians, which means that the Jews are running the lives of the Christians, which is exactly correct. So we've lived through this deception since forever, and that has to be torn apart and analyzed, and the light shone on it. So while they didn't get what they wanted in the First World War, they did do it in the Second World War. America signed on to the United Nations. The Rockefellers and the Rothschilds at this time had the banking, the media, the school systems, all in their grip and control. Convinced people that Israel needed a state. And they sold the United Nations on the idea, not of world government, but of ending conflicts, ending war, peace. And then they moved on to eradicating poverty. Then they went on to eradicating hunger. And then they went on to controlling your food through the FAO and your health through the WHO. And your banking through the World Bank and IMF, or your finances, and so on and so forth. So all of these agencies control everything that's going on in your nation now, just the way they want it. Now, the United Nations is nefarious because it was the Rockefellers that donated the land in New York to put up the headquarters of the United Nations. And that is really sick, because you have Rockefeller thanking the media for staying quiet for so many decades, because we would have never got to first base, really, on our takedown of the West had the media not agreed to shut up, which they did. And Rockefeller thanked them in 1991 in Baden-Baden, Germany. And then the Rockefellers giving the land, donating the land for the United Nations. And then Rockefeller saying that, I've been accused of being an internationalist. And if that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. So you have these people who are inside your nation working very hard to take your nation down, to put it under the control of an international governance body. And we got to stop that crap. Why? United States, land of the free and home of the brave. And here you have the United Nations parked on your land with all of these flags flying, with a handgun outside as a statue or whatever they want to call it, a reminder, a notice. But this revolver, the barrel is tied in a knot. Now, why this is allowed to be in America is beyond me. Why the American people haven't burned this place to the ground decades ago is totally beyond me. Here you have this big push and all of these false flags to show people that guns are dangerous. And you got the United Nations sitting on your land with a pistol, with the barrel tied in a knot, telling you, the people, that they're going to disarm you, which they don't have a hope in hell ever doing, but that's the message. And people do turn in their guns, and you've got the left, guns kill people. Well, so do knives, and so do hatchets, and so do blunt objects, and so does a good cast iron frying pan. But I don't hear any word about banning all of those things. No, just the handgun and the rifle. Because you don't have to be in hand-to-hand combat to defend yourself. But they want you disarmed. And they keep ramping this up at every opportunity they have. But the point is that the United Nations, which is as anti-freedom as you can possibly get, the whole idea of the United Nations is world government. The whole idea is end of nation states. Here you have a group of very evil men and women who want the demise of your nation. They also say that what's not sustainable, private property, private transportation, golf courses, air conditioning, and so on and so forth. And there it sits on your land, home of the free, or land of the free and home of the brave. But this group of people, this building, represents weak people. They're not brave, and they're not free. That is what the United Nations stands for. Is that you will bow down to world governance. You will live in a totalitarian system. And this system that you don't vote for will tell you how much food, water, housing, transportation, they rule your whole life. And there it sits. Land donated by one of the most nefarious families ever to be on the soil of America, in order to internationalize everything, in order to take down the nation state. And people still sing the national anthem and don't get the connections here. How can you say it? How can you, sing home of the land of the free and home of the brave? How can you do that when the whole headquarters, which wants the exact opposite, is allowed to sit on your land? It makes no sense. The enemy is inside the gates. The enemy has been inside the gates since way before World War I. And people don't want to believe it. They don't want to accept it. In other words, you're hugging the lies, and thrown out the truth. You shield your eyes and your ears and your mind from the truth, and live your lives in the fantasy world of the lie. You know, if you want, one of the proudest things. I mean, I was in America working when they burned Waco down, and that blew me away. I mean, that really blew me away. Home of the free and land of the free and home of the brave. I think I got that right. So you watch the military do what they did to this group of people. Hadn't harmed anybody, hadn't threatened anybody. 50-some days of hell in America with a very nasty ending to it. And the American people didn't get up off their couches and go to defend these people. That's not brave, and that ain't free. That is bowed down, beaten dog. Now, can America become strong again? It's a good question. Very good question. Because this is World War III, and it is a spiritual, psychological war. Now, the men and women have been weakened to the point where they don't know how to stand up anymore. If they knew how to stand up, they would burn down the United Nations building. Or, short of burning the thing down, which is kind of a waste of a building, just go in there, because these are internationalists, which means there's treason inside your gates. And just remove all of these people, kick them out of the country, or arrest them and try them for atrocities against man, which they are most definitely guilty of. They've plotted. All of their documents show they're plotting. And so they are conspiring to cause harm. Massive harm. Now that you can go and charge these people with. And if the police won't charge them, well, then you have the right to arrest them yourselves. Which I'm just going to divert myself here for a second, because when I'm saying that you have the right of citizen's arrest, I see that Jim Nabors, who played Gomer Pyle on the Andy Griffith Show, passed away yesterday or the day before. And it's the same thing, you know. When Deputy Barney Fife gave Gomer a ticket that really shouldn't have been given, but it's on the books, and Barney always went by the book. And then Barney pulled a U-turn or something on the main street. I think that's what he did. And then Gomer went after Barney with a citizen's arrest, which really pissed Barney off. But Gomer was absolutely correct that they do have the right, or he has the right. So do you have the right to make a citizen's arrest, and that's a good point. Now. And we have to start doing stuff like that, or we're just going to sit back and allow all this nonsense to continue. Now, the United Nations headquarters looks like a pretty big complex, and I'm sure there's a pile of rooms in it which could be used for a more moral purpose in the United Nations, which is an amoral entity doing amoral things. It would be much better to moralize, I guess, the United Nations building and turn it into apartments for those who thought they went to defend your nation, and for homeless people, homeless vets, whatever, and take down all of those other flags and stick up an American flag. Because it is American soil. and start working towards, once again, the land of the free and home of the brave. You can't just say it. Words really have no power without action. I mean, if you are and you believe that you're in the land of the free and the home of the brave, then maybe something that would show people that, yes, we are the land of the free and the home of the brave. Or I may have that backward. Doesn't matter. Same thing. But you're going to have to do something. You're going to have to say, well, you know, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and we're about to prove it. Just like our forefathers proved it when they give Britain the boot. Just like when Luther gave the Vatican, Rome, and Catholicism the boot. Didn't have mass communications, didn't have, vehicles other than a horse. But they still got it done. Because they still understood right from wrong. But they were men and women. Now we live in the world of humanism, which is completely different. And we see the results. See mass homelessness. Everything the UN said that they were about, end of homelessness, end of hunger, end of wars. Well, ever since the UN's been created, the hunger factor's been going up, the homeless factor's been going up, the war factor never stopped. But I don't know how people get sucked into this except through the school system, which are the same people who set up the school system. Now, the original book, I think, of this Ramsey, my understanding anyways, is the original part of this book, or the original writing, which was written in 1952 or 3, and then Ramsey died in 55. But this is just another man who saw through the fog. You know, moved the veil aside, the curtain aside, so you get a real good unobstructed view of what the hell was actually going on. And he wrote it down. But all this stuff is banned for a long time. Which just goes back to show you that putting your child in the school, there's a huge difference between the word educate and the word knowledge. And their education system there is to fill your head full of what they want it filled with, not the truth, just what they want it filled with, to help advance their cause, which is totally against your cause. So, I think the original book is only like a little over 100 pages or something. And I think this, I'm not sure if this is the particular book or whatever, is somewhere around 300 pages. But I'm going to get me a copy here and read it because it's pretty interesting. Now, he relies a lot on the, apparently, the Elders of Zion, which spells out a pretty nefarious game, but the Jews in that say that was that's not real. Well, nothing they've done is real, and it's not for the benefit of any man or woman. It's only for the benefit of their movement. And they've proven that they will lie, cheat, steal, kill to get what they want, which is domination of the world. it really bothers me that this country of Canada that I live in has been so involved in this. I mean, way before the signing of the League of Nations. I mean, we have been part of this Jew game forever. And all of our international affairs people and that have been involved in this. If you look at the Trilateral Commission and that, it's full of Canadians, politicians, justices, full of them. And that was fired up by the Rockefellers and some other folks, I guess, who are all internationalists. So anybody that's got something to do with the Trilateral Commission is an internationalist, which is a traitor to the nation. But you don't read this stuff in the papers. No, you'll read that some family was sued by a couple of gay people because they wouldn't, the family, who was Christian, wouldn't cook them a gay wedding cake and explain to them, you know, this is against our beliefs, so we're going to decline, and you know, could you please go to another bakery? Well, there's all kinds of bakeries out there that would have made a gay wedding cake for these two. But no, they have to go and sue these people who ended up losing the family business. Now, obviously, they didn't cook them the cake. So obviously, if they had a cake, somebody else baked it for them, which is what the family said in the first place, is against our beliefs, so could you please go elsewhere and get your cake? So they obviously went elsewhere and got their cake, but they couldn't respect, this is the problem, they couldn't respect the beliefs of the people who owned the store. And the message is, you will bow down to us, this tiny little minority, or we will destroy you, and the courts are on our side, and the police are on our side, which they are. And this all has to stop. So we have to expose all of this stuff, and then we have to move forward with it. Oh, I said move forward. In the good sense, not in the Marxist sense. So this guy, you need to read the book. I wish everybody would read it. I'm going to read it. I just don't have time right now because I'm doing a show. But there's some other books in here. The Controversy of Zion, Behind Communitarianism, what's that say? Behind Communism. And there's another book here, The Jewish Strategy, and The Cross and the Flag. And the problem is most people don't want to read anything. And I find this extraordinary. This book was written in 1952, and it says originally published 1978. So again, the people who control the books, which are the Jews, and the people who control the media, which is the Jews. Now, sure, there'll be non-Jews in there, but I mean the actual original setup to control was from the Jewish camp. So these are things that you didn't learn in school because it's not to the advantage of those who hold you into slavery for you to know anything. So now we have an opportunity to learn and put some knowledge in our heads. So I think I'll just buzz through Archibald Ramsey quick. I'm not going to deal with the book. I got to read the book. I'm sure there's some synopsis, but there's a bit of stuff in here. I'll just buzz through this Wikipedia thing. And like I said, as my teacher said, don't believe anything you read, see, or hear until you personally verify the information. Failure to do so opens your mind to accepting all manner of propaganda and outright lies as truth, i.e. the public school system, the political system, the church system, all depend on you accepting, your mind accepting propaganda and outright lies as truth, because once the mind has accepted a lie as a truth, it's damn near impossible to get the mind to throw the lie out and accept the truth, and they know that, and that's what they use to control the masses. So, anyways, we'll do this quickly here, and we'll get on to something else. Captain Archibald Henry Ball Ramsay, 1894 to 1955, was a British Army officer who later went into politics as a Scottish Unionist member of Parliament, MP. From the late 30s, he developed increasingly strident anti-Semitic views. In 1940, after his involvement with a suspected spy at the United States Embassy, he became the only British MP to be interned under the Defense Regulation 18B, which this is what I like about Wikipedia. It's laced with links. Okay, so just in that one little paragraph, what's highlighted: British Army, the Scottish Unionist Member of Parliament, the anti-Semitic is highlighted, the United States Embassy is highlighted, interned is highlighted, Defense Regulation 18B is highlighted. So if you want to know anything more about any of those things, you can just hit the link, and it will take you there. When I'm trying to do a long history search, I'll usually start with Wikipedia, because it highlights so many freaking names, dates, and all this kind of stuff. But then you can go from there. Okay? I don't trust any of them. So you go from there, and then you search other places for that information to try to verify it, which is important to do. And trust me, it's a lot more interesting than sitting in front of a freaking TV set watching some 2-bit comedy or some sports game that really doesn't have anything to do with you. I always look at TV and the movies as, why am I paying to go watch somebody work? That is a hell of a deal, because that's all they're doing. They're doing their jobs. And you pay to watch people work. You just came home from work, and now you're paying to watch people work. Doesn't make any damn sense at all. Anyways, he was born from a Scottish aristocratic family. His grandfather was Sir Henry Ramsay. His younger brother was George Ramsay, 12th Earl of Dalhousie. He attended Eton College, the Royal Military College. And after the outbreak of World War I, he served in France for 2 years. He received a severe head injury before being invalided out to transferred to the War Office in London. Here he met and married Lady Stuart Ismay Preston, daughter of Viscount Gormanston and widow of Lord Stuart, who had been killed on active service in the war. His wife was already the mother of 3 surviving children. The couple went on to have 4 sons, yada, yada, yada. As the war was coming to an end, Ramsay served at the British War Mission in Paris. He retired from the army with the rank of captain in 1920. He spent the 20s as a company director near Angus, and became active in the Conservative Party in the 1931 general election. Ramsay was elected as MP, South Middleton. He was regarded as a likable and charming man. He was nicknamed Jock among his friends, who had a sincere and earnest approach. Ramsay, I guess, had a sincere and earnest approach and was an engaging and persuasive public speaker. However, Ramsay was not considered a potential candidate for high office. The most senior appointment he obtained was a government member. I didn't know this was such a thing, but we have the Milk Marketing Board here, so I guess it makes sense. He was a government member of the Potato Marketing Board. I don't know, that doesn't sound like a very interesting job, but anyways. After the Spanish Civil War broke out, Ramsay became a strong supporter of the nationalists. Oh my freaking God, not a nationalist. Oh, a white supremacist. Damn. Largely arising from his opposition to the violent anti-Saracen, I can't even see, whatever, of the Spanish Republicans and their attacks on the Roman Catholic Church. Ramsay, however, was an Anglican himself. In the early months of the war, he objected in Parliament to what he saw as bias in BBC news reports. So he noticed that there was some bias reporting from the BBC, which was the main news channel. We have the CBC here in Canada, which is just the BBC with a C in front of it. So the British Broadcasting Communist Corporation is the BBC, and the Communist Broadcasting Corporation in Canada is an offshoot, a child of the BBC, if you will. He pointed to links between Spanish Republicans and the Soviet Union. Late in 1937, Ramsay formed the United Christian Front to combat attacks on Christianity, which emanate from Moscow, is a quote, which is perfectly true. Many distinguished peers and churchmen joined, but the organization was criticized in a letter to the Times by senior religious figures, including William Temple, Archbishop of York, and Donald Soper. The objectors said that while they supported Christian unity, they could not support the United Christian Front, as it was mainly concerned with the Spanish Civil War and, quote, adopts a view in which of which it seems ill-founded. So the church has been, the media and the church and the schools and the politicians have all been lying to the people for basically ever. And we got to come to terms with that. Ramsay became aware of a plan to hold a conference of free thinkers in London in 1938, which was being organized by the International Federation of Free Thinkers. Anytime you see the word international, you know you got trouble on your hands. Together with his supporters in Parliament, he denounced this as a goddess conference, or a godless conference, organized by a Moscow-based organization. On the 28th of June 1938, he asked for permission to introduce as a private member's bill the Aliens Restriction Blasphemy Bill to prohibit conference attendees from entering Britain. He won the vote by 165 to 134, but the bill went no further. Ramsay's opposition to communism led him to look to other countries. For example, on January 13, 1938, he had given a speech to the business club in which he observed that Adolf Hitler's enmity to Jews rose from his knowledge. Quote, that the real power behind the Third International is a group of revolutionary Jews. Sometime later in 1938, he read The Rules of Russia by reactionary Roman Catholic priest from Ireland, Father Denis Fahy, who contended that of 59 members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1935, of the 59 members, 56 of them were Jews, and the remaining 3 were married to Jews. All the same, Ramsay was becoming ever more sympathetic to Germany. In September, he wrote to the Times to defend the right of the pro-German Suderland to self-determination. On the 15th of November 1938, Ramsay was invited to a luncheon party at the German embassy in London, where he met some noted British sympathizers with Nazi Germany, including Barry Donneville. In December, he introduced another private member's bill called the Companies Act, 1929 Amendment Bill, which would require shares in news agencies and newspapers to be held openly and not through nominees. In his speech promoting the bill, Ramsay claimed the press was being manipulated and controlled by international financiers based in New York, who wanted to thrust his country into war. Ramsay was given permission to introduce his bill by 151 to 141. Again, it went nowhere. In December 38, the fascist Journal of the Imperial Fascist League declared that Ramsay had become Jew-wise, a term which indicated someone who had come to believe the Jews held too much influence. Now, that's actually the meaning of anti-Semitism. You know, I got thrown in jail on Facebook a few times, and I had all these people calling me anti-Semitic and all the rest of this nonsense. But when you look up anti-Semite, I think it is, or I think it's anti-Semite. What you find in etymology is exactly what it says here, as a term which indicated someone who had come to believe the Jews had too much influence. And if you understand what's going on in the world and what's been going on in the world for centuries, you can't help but be an anti-Semite. If you think, then you must be an anti-Semite. If you understand the influence that the Jews have over the media, the schools, politics, and so on and so forth, you can't help but be an anti-Semite, because you believe they hold too much control. I mean, for him to become Jew-wise, you know, he believed that the media was being manipulated, the press was being manipulated and controlled by international financiers. And that was in, when the hell was that, 1930s? No, 1920, yeah, 38. Well, it was long before 1938 when the Rothschilds came to America to deal with the banking system or control it. But before they started, the whole idea was, before we do anything here, we got to control the press. I don't think anybody's going to deny the Rothschilds are Jews. So they looked the situation over, and they figured that if they not owned, but controlled the message of the 25 largest papers in the United States, that they could control the message. And that's exactly what they did. So Ramsay, in bringing that bill forward in 38, is absolutely correct. But this declaration that Ramsay had become Jew-wise is a red light. So now we got to do whatever we can to shut this guy up. Because what Ramsay, through his research in that, came to understand was that the Jews held too much influence. And that makes you anti-Semitic. So if you believe the Jews hold too much influence over our society, considering Canada was founded on the idea of Judeo-Christian customs and beliefs which are completely opposite to one another, then you can see why they don't like anyone saying the Jews hold too much influence. On the 10th of January 1939, the Honorable Ms. Ismay Ramsey gave another speech to the Business Club in which she claimed the national press was largely under Jewish control. Now, she's absolutely correct in that an international group of Jews were behind world revolution in every single country, and that Hitler must have his reason for what he did. The speech was reported in the local newspaper and attracted the attention of the Rabbi of Edinburgh, Hebrew congregation, who wrote to the Scotsman challenging Mrs. Ramsey's to produce evidence. She wrote to her on her behalf, citing Father Fay's booklet, and the resulting correspondences lasted for nearly a month, including a letter from 11 ministers of the Church of Scotland in the county of Pebbles, repudiating the views of their MP. Some members of Ramsey's local conservative association in Pebbles were not pleased by what they considered negative publicity. However, Ramsey assured them that he would continue to be a supporter of Chamberlain and the national government, which would be wrong. But anyways, Ramsey made attempts to make controversial speeches in private meetings rather than in public. On the 27th, he spoke to a branch of the anti-Semitic Nordic League in Kilburn, attacking Chamberlain for introducing conscription at the instigation of the Jews, and claiming that the Conservative Party relies on Jew money. After the controversy over Mrs. Ramsey's January speech died down, Ramsey decided to influence others so that they would rid the Conservative Party of its alleged Jewish control. To this end, he set up the Right Club in May 1939, noting down those who had joined in a red leather-bound lockable ledger, the Red Book it was called. There were 135 names on the men's list and 100 on a separate ladies' list. The mention of the Right Club includes a broad spectrum of those known to be anti-Semitic, including William Joyce and the Member of Parliament John Hamilton Mackie. Those who were in some respects fellow travelers with anti-Semitism, and some friends of Ramsey's who may have joined without knowing the actual functions of the club. At its early meetings, the 5th Duke of Wellington took the chair. While Ramsey was attempting to launch the Right Club, he spoke of at a meeting of the Nordic League at Wigmore Hall, at which a reporter from the Daily Worker was present and reported Ramsey as saying that they needed to end Jewish control. And if we don't do it constitutionally, we'll do it with steel. The statement greeted with wild applause. The popular magazine John Bull picked up on the report and challenged Ramsey to contradict it or explain himself. Ramsey local constituency newspaper, the Pebbleshire Advertiser, made the same challenge, and Ramsey responded by admitting he had made the speech, citing the fact that three halls had refused to host the meeting as evidence of Jewish control. On the second day of the Second World War, September the 4th, 1939, Ramsey sat in the library of the House of Commons writing a parody, The Land of Hope and Glory, beginning with the land of dope and Jewry. When the Secretary of State for War frequent target of anti-Semitism, was forced out of office. Ramsey distributed in the House of Commons many copies of The Truth, a magazine closely connected to Nelson Chamberlain, which argued that Horror Bechley was no loss to the government. He also put down a motion which cited the regretful reactions of many newspapers sacking as evidence of the Jewish control of the press. Privately, Ramsey had been invited to some of the secret meetings at which right-wing opponents of the war discussed tactics. However, after they came to be dominated by Oswald Mosley and his supporters, Ramsey withdrew. The Right Club spent the phony war period distributing propaganda in the form of leaflets and sticky backs, wanted to maintain an atmosphere which phony war, as it was called, might be converted into an honorable negotiated peace. In addition, Ramsey, land of dope and jewelry rhyme, the slogans included "War destroys workers" and "This is a Jew war," which it was. So it kills me that this book was apparently written in 1952, and The Nameless War, and apparently, from what I'm seeing, it wasn't officially published till 1978. That's the withholding of history, and this is a huge problem that we deal with today. You know, you're only allowed to know what they want you to know. Although they write everything down, so you can look up their plans because they write everything down. But they know most people won't. By the time you come through, most people come through the school system, they don't want to read anything anyways. So this goes on, and this is something I'll do this too, is interment on one of the last members to join the Right Club was Tyler Kent, a cipher clerk at the Embassy of the United States in London. Ramsey gave Kent the ledger containing the list of Right Club members for safekeeping. Kent was stealing top-secret documents from the embassy and had already fallen under suspicion on May 20th after the U.S. ambassador had agreed to waive Kent's diplomatic immunity. His flat was raided and he was arrested. The locked red book of Ramsey's was forced open. Ramsey's involvement with Kent was extremely worrying to the authorities, as Ramsey enjoyed parliamentary privilege. If Kent had given these stolen documents to Ramsey and he had spoken about them in Parliament, it would have been impossible to prevent their publication. The cabinet decided to extend Defense Regulation 18B to give more power to detain people suspected of disloyalty. Ramsey was arrested and lodged in Brixton Prison on an order under Regulation 18B on the 23rd of May, 1940. He engaged solicitors through whom he attempted to defend his reputation. When Lord Marley said in the House of Lords that Ramsey was Hitler's chosen speaker for Scotland in the event of an invasion, Oswald Hudson Collier immediately sent a letter of complaint. As an 18B defense, Ramsey's only lawful method of challenging his detention was to appeal to the advisory committee under Norman Brickett, but that recommended his continued detention. However, some of Ramsey's colleagues argued that he was that as he was a member of Parliament, his detention was a breach of parliamentary privilege. His detention was referred to as the committee privileges. On the 9th of October, the committee reported that the detention was not a breach of privilege. The New York Times published an article on Britain's fifth column in July 40, which claimed informed American sources that he had sent to the German legation in Dublin treasonable information given to him by Tyler Kent. Ramsay sued for libel, resulting in a trial in 1941. He asserted his loyalty to Britain. However, some of Ramsay's answers did him damage. For example, when asked if he wanted Nazism to be defeated, he replied, substituting Germany for Nazism, not only Germany, but also the Judaic menace. And summing up, the judge said he was convinced Hitler would call Ramsay friend, and that Ramsay also was disloyal in heart and soul to his king, his government, and the people. However, the New York Times could not defend its story, having found no evidence that Ramsay had communicated anything to the German system, and it was found guilty. The judge awarded a farthing damages, the customary award for liable plaintiff who technically won a case, but was judged to have brought it on themselves. If the defendant in a liable case pays into the court beforehand a sum not less than the damages ultimately awarded, they're not liable for costs. And Ramsay became liable for both prosecution and defense costs. Another consequence of the trial was that Ramsay's local unionist association disowned him and asked another member of Parliament, David Robinson, to undertake Ramsay's constituency work. Ramsay continued occasionally to put down written parliamentary questions from jail, sometimes taking up the cases for fellow 18B internees, and his eldest son, serving yada yada yada, died of pneumonia. August 43, Ramsay was finally released from detention. Being one of the last few 18B detainees, he immediately returned to Westminster to resume his seat in the Commons, causing at least one member to storm out of the chamber. His only significant action in the remainder of the Parliament was a motion calling in for the reinstatement of the 1275 Statute of Jewry passed under King Edward I. He did not defend his seat in the 1945 general election. So in 1952, Ramsay wrote The Nameless War was an autobiography and a plea to justify his actions. Much of the book consisted of an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory interpreting the whole of the modern history as a Jewish campaign for world domination. It quoted extensively from the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the authenticity of which Ramsay took for granted, and added assertions including that Calvin had been a Jew whose real name was Cohen, that Cromwell had been a paid agent of the Jews, and that the entire English Civil War and the execution of Charles I were staged for the sole purpose of allowing Jews to return to England. The book is still current in extreme right circles. That's white supremacists. Ramsay attended some far-right political meetings, but did not attract attention. He died in 1955. So, I guess what this gets at is that the people who are speaking out against the Jews, and there's more of them every day. I remember when I did a show on Orion Talk Radio, you weren't allowed to say anything negative about Jews, and I thought that rather odd. I forget which host it was who came out and said something negative about Jews, and next thing you know, there's a banner up on Orion Talk Radio that they won't accept this type of behavior or whatever it was. So, you know, most of what you see on the internet, most of the so-called truther sites and that are paid, controlled opposition groups. It's very difficult to get the truth. That's why people have to read and research. You know, now I didn't know about the 1275 state statute of the Jewry. I imagine that's pretty negative. Since the time of the Norman Conquest, Jews had been filling a small but vital role in the English economy. Usury by Christians was banned by the church at the time, but Jews were permitted to act as moneylenders and bankers. The position enabled some Jews to amass tremendous wealth, but also earned them the enmity of the English populace, which added to the increasing anti-Semitic sentiments of the time due to widespread indebtedness and financial ruin among the Gentile population. Okay, so that's back in the 1200s. And what's changed exactly? What has changed exactly? Who's running the banks? Who's running the media? Who are the money lenders? And who is stuck in widespread indebtedness and financial ruin, other than the Gentile population? And then they turn around and say that our nation here, at least in Canada, and I think the United States, maybe not, was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Well, it's like legal and law. They're two exact opposites. Jewry and Christian is you can't tie these two things together. Just like legal and law, you can't tie these two things together. But by interlacing the language and continually repeating it, people come to believe that Judeo-Christian has something to do with one another, that they're common, and that they are jointly the same, and the same with legal and law. So what's changed? Nothing. The increasing anti-Semitic sentiments of the 1200s is the same as the increasing anti-Semitic sentiments of today. The people are completely, I read something somewhere that Canada is the most indebted nation on the planet per population, and yet we're the richest place on the planet as far as resources is concerned. So who's running this show? The Gentiles? I'm thinking not. And the kicker is that there's so few Jews, and these Jews seem to hold so much influence. And being an anti-Semite is someone that doesn't like the over-influence of the Jews and the control they have over our lives. So I think we ought to start, we should all target the UN and that and say that, you have a day for everything. It's time for the day of anti-Semitism as a positive thing. When Edward returned from the Crusades in 1274, 2 years after his accession as King of England, he found that the land had become a commodity and that many of his subjects had become dispossessed and were in danger of destitution. Jews traded land for money, and land was often mortgaged to Jewish money lenders. Nothing's changed, folks. As special direct subjects of the monarch, Jews could be taxed indiscriminately by the king, Some have described the situation as indirect usury, the monarch permitting and encouraging Jews to practice usury and then taxing the profit. In the years leading up to the statute, Edward taxed them heavily to help finance his forthcoming military campaign in Wales, which commenced in 1277. One theory holds that he had exhausted the finance resources of the Jewish community when the statute was passed in 1275. Now, I read that, you're trying to figure out, where this real estate thing come from. How is it that you can go and get a mortgage and you can pay on this mortgage for most of your life? And the fact is that you didn't buy anything. All you purchased was the right of enjoyment. You didn't purchase the land. You can't purchase the land. And this goes back to a story I read, which I think was back in the 1200s. It was somewhere in there. That a king had to go to war. This could be the same story, but this is Wikipedia, so this is out of an old book. And that this is basically where real estate started and mortgages started, was with the Jews. And, the one story was that the king needed $1.2 million, I think it was, or that's what was given to him in gold and silver by the Jewish bankers, in order to finance a war. And then they went to the king and said, we should get something out of this. So we gave you $1.2 million in actual gold and silver. Now you should allow us to lend to your subjects an equal amount without really lending them anything, which is the basis of the banking system today. Okay? So basically they signed for promissory note to pay them for the loan at interest, which is the same as the thing works today. And there's another story about real estate, where real estate came from, and they're talking to the king and said, what we were thinking? You could get a lot of money. We could all profit nicely if we sold the land, or if you sold the land. And the king looks at them and says, what are you, stupid? If I sell the land, then I won't have any land, and then I won't be the king. Idiots. But then they tell the king, no, you're not actually going to sell anything. Okay, you will always retain ownership of the land, which is the same as today. What we're going to do is we're going to sell them, because they use the legal terms, the legal language with land, and land ain't the same, right? Money ain't the same. Most words aren't the same. It's a jargon. It's the language of the deceivers and the thieves, and they use it to gain advantage. So they go to the king and they say, no. You're always going to own the land, but what we're going to sell is we're going to sell the idea, the abstract concept of land, which they will purchase, the enjoyment of the land, of which the king had already given to the people. But there's no money in that. They used to be deeded land or granted land, or the use of the land, in order so that they could build a house and live and raise a family or whatever. But it was reciprocal, because in return for the granting of the use of the land, if the king got into a war, that these people had to come and fight in the war. But now the idea was, we'll let them go into debt, and then they will buy properties, and they'll be able to sell the property, i.e. the land, only the abstract concept, not the terra firma, because they never owned it. And they go do this. So now you can sell what you think you own, but the king still owns it. But you can buy and sell it, right? And you can get a mortgage, and you can pay interest on it, and that's modern life. And it's all a fraud. All of it's a frickin' fraud. Now, why are we allowing ourselves to be dealt with in this manner? Why are we out there busting our asses, slaving away in order to pay these guys interest on something that doesn't even exist? You know? Yes, you can purchase this and you can have the enjoyment of it. You can spend money on it to improve it, but you never own it. But for your enjoyment's sake, you can purchase that. You can live here and you can enjoy it and you can improve it, and it's only $750,000 at interest. But again, remember, you don't own it. So just sign here. And we're not going to lend you any money because your signature is what creates the money, an IOU, a promissory note, of which you're going to pay, even though we didn't lend you none. And this all comes from way back then. Nothing's changed. Absolutely nothing's changed. It's only gotten worse. It's only gotten worse. I have the head of the real estate industry here. When I first called the board or the head or whatever you want to call it of the group that looks after the Ontario Real Estate Board, the government organization, they didn't want to talk about real estate, even though that's what they're in charge of. They didn't want to talk about it at all. So then I phoned Ottawa. They wanted to talk even less about it. So I ended up talking to my local county real estate board, and I was talking to the head of that board, and she agreed wholeheartedly that the real estate industry is a complete and total fraud. But she figured that only half of the realtors, or less than half of the realtors, actually understand that it's a fraud. And I said, well, this is pretty sad, because now you're saying that half of the realtors know they're involved in fraud and the other half don't know they're involved in fraud, but then the real estate board never told them either way. But it is fraud. And the mortgages, which you create the money when you sign, and that's in the English documents, spelling out exactly how that operates. So nobody lend you any money. You don't own the land you're living on, and you're paying usury on a ridiculous cost of something that you don't own, which is exactly what went down in the 1200s. And this idea of a legislature, that was a screw over with the king in order for them, the bankers and the Jews, to get even more influence. The Jews and the bankers have become your kings. The Jews, the bankers, and the lawyers, call it a pyramid. They write your law. They run the legal system, which is a jargon language used to deceive and gain advantage. That's deceive you and gain advantage over you, and then the banking system. All legislation that gets passed has to do with taking money out of your pocket one way or the other, or taking away your God-given rights from you. It's all about profit. It's all about fraud. It's all about deception. And the only difference between the legislature and the king There would usually be a scrap, and whoever won the scrap would become king. And all they did was rebrand that system and turned it into a parliamentary legislative assembly, of which you have opposing sides, i.e. two kings fighting, but they're not fighting on the battlefield. And those who set it up control both sides of it. They control both the right and the left of it because they created it to deceive and take advantage or gain advantage over you stupid Gentiles. So what you have now, instead of a battle on a field between a couple of kings and their armies, you have a battle, a paper battle, a propaganda battle, a battle of words to see which side is going to win the war and become the king for the next 4 years. Nothing's changed. It's exactly what that is. You know, and this idea that they control both sides, all you got to do is go back to Rockefeller and Morris Strong, when Morris Strong was going to run in '68 for the Liberal government for a seat with Trudeau, who was a member of Club of Rome, trained by the Jesuits, yada, 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 a noted communist. But apparently Rockefeller tells Strong, what the hell are you doing? Well, I'm going to run for as an MP in Trudeau's government. Well, don't do that. Why not? Have influence. Well, not really. Because according to Rockefeller, to Strong, we already control both sides. So we're the kingmakers. So we can have a lot more influence from outside than inside. So Morris Strong didn't run. But after the Trudeau government came in, they started up the Canadian Institute for Development, overseas development, which was funneling money from your taxpayer pockets into CETA, which was run by Morris Strong, who brought us the environment movement, who brought us Rio, and all the rest of this nefarious nonsense. This is all influence from the outside. So being head of CETA, being the head of the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, and working with the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and Gorbachev and these clowns all those years, he actually was working inside and outside, as was Rockefeller. Right? They did all of these papers and that for the government, to influence the government to do basically what they wanted them to do. So really nothing's changed. Nothing's really changed since the 1200s. We have been under that same influence all this time. And we got to break the spell. It was they who created the wars. It was they who created the recessions and depressions. It was they that control the media and set up the school system and control the churches and control the politicians. This small group and I'm talking small group, run your life. Now, when I went up to get a coffee this morning, I was up last night to get a coffee for the show, and it's Max Milk up there, and it's run by East Indians. And if I had the money, I would have went to India, because when the East Indians first took control of the stores around here, the Max, Eunuch, who was the manager of the store, but his dad worked there. He didn't speak that good at English, but a very interesting guy. And we talked a lot about India, and he thought it would do me good to go to India, but I didn't. He was going over for 3 months or something. I said, I can't afford that. But nice family. And so now we have a new manager of the store who's East Indian, and his buddy's East Indian. And so I was in there last night. We were shooting the breeze and that with a couple other people. And so my ex-brother-in-law was there. He's in one of those carts he drive around in. And he had some bone problems. And so he was up there last night. It always kind of helps clear my head up a little bit before I do a show. So up there this morning, I see my ex-brother-in-law's cart in front of the store. We go in, I'm talking to some people, and then the two East Indian guys came in from last night, and I said, this is almost like Groundhog Day, right? Because, like, I think this is the same group of people that was here last night. But they'd been talking about kites and that, and the lady working at the store, her daughter is going out with a Brazilian guy who was there. And the East Indians and the Brazilian guys are talking about kite days and some of the kind of nefarious things they did with their kite strings, and that turned them basically into weapons. But I had thinking about that. So when he came in this morning, not the Brazilian, but one of the East Indian guys, I got talking to about India and about Eunuch's father, and wishing I had been able to go over there with him, and he just informed me that, yeah, he just went back last week. So we got talking about politics and that a little bit, and we got talking about India, and talking about the East India Company. And I asked him, I said, this kite flying stuff, what the hell is that all about anyways? Like, from what I heard last night, like, millions of people fly these kites. He said, oh, yeah. And I said, I think I know what the kite flying is supposed to represent, but, if you could tell me. And he says, it's about freedom. And I says, yeah, and India's not free. No. And I said, neither is here. And I said, like India was, how exactly did the Brits take down India? Now, he came up with the East India Company. But again, his history of what was behind it's a little sketchy because, of course, he went to public school. And you're only told what they want you to know. But, he said when India was like, I don't know, you want to call them tribes or, separate communities all over the place, right? And just like the world was before the Jews got a hold of it and wanted to turn it into one homogenized shithole. And so this people in this part of India did their own thing. Didn't have TVs and everything. They just did their own thing. And the people over that area did their own thing. And just like what it was like here when our forefathers came here. And they did what they did in their neck of the woods. And then Britain, he said it was like a whole bunch of little countries or districts or whatever that were really kind of separate from each other. Everything was different in each one that you went to. They had their own cultures and their own whatever else, societies. They called it caste system, but it was the Hudson's Bay, or not the Hudson's Bay, but the East India Company. He said it was formed like in 1400s or whatever. And I said, yeah. And I said, we had the Hudson's Bay Company here. So, but the fact is that how did the East India Company, because they came to rule, they became the government of India. And he goes, exactly. And he was telling me they actually sold the takedown of India by the British on the idea of the word we hear almost every single day, diversity. And diversity, if you look it up in etymology, is a rather nefarious term. But anyways, they used the idea of diversity because India was so diverse, so many different cultures and ways of doing things and this and that. Even though they all lived in this place called India, it was like a whole slew of different provinces or countries or counties or whatever. And the idea was that they were selling the idea that India is extremely diverse, even though the people are all the same color and everything. We need to bring this diversity together to make things more profitable, better, stronger societies and all this. So it was just more of the legal language, the deception, to gain advantage. And I said, the East India Company was the same as the Hudson's Bay Company over here. They're both chartered trading companies, as was the Virginia and Plymouth Company in the United States. And they had their own governors, their own jails, their own laws. And the gentleman from India said, absolutely, right? And so eventually they took control of the government. Yeah. And I told them that when I talked to the Minister of, or the Attorney General's office about the Hudson's Bay Company, and when you go back far enough and you understand what took place, that Canada, and when I told this East Indian today, I said, so India ended up just being a rebranded East India Company. He goes, exactly. And when I talked to the Attorney General guy in Ontario here, and we had the discussion, and I explained that when you go back far enough, you find that Canada is nothing more than a rebranded Hudson's Bay Company. We live in company houses, we eat company foods, we go to company schools, we use the company banks, and when we die, we are buried in a company frickin' cemetery. Of which the East Indian agreed with. So, I was telling him, I said, well, maybe it's time we kick up Kite Day here in Canada and fly the kites to show our intent to become free and to take the logical next step, which is control of our resources and our banking system and our education system and so on and so forth. Put it back in the hands of the people, because it's never been in the hands of the people, ever. But we built this nation as the Americans built their nation. It was the American forefathers who slaved, sweated, and died to build a future for us. And we have a duty to take these countries and put them where they belong, be governed by who they need to be governed by, those who built these countries, not the temporary king of the castle. In the old days, if you didn't like the king, you had to go drag his ass out and hang him or whatever. Nowadays, they've civilized the changing of the guard, so to speak. So we don't have a civil war to get the king out. We go to vote. You don't like the king? There's an election coming up in 4 years. So I'll do whatever the frig I want for the next 4 years. And if you don't like it, you can put a new king in place. But the problem is that the kings are all controlled by the same people. The kings are the puppets, and we're the fools. We have to wrap our brains around the reality of all of this stuff. And then we got to move. You see, possession is 90% of the law. And we, not the politicians, built everything that's here. So therefore we claim possession. This is our land. This is our country. And they're doing to us right now exactly what they did to the native people. And it is extremely important that we reconnect with our brothers, the native people that were here before us, and stop being strangers and stop being antagonizing each other. It wasn't us that destroyed the native people. It was the company. It's not the government, so to speak. You don't have a government. You have a company. Rebranded Hudson's Bay Company, telling the people what they can and can't do. Playing the part of a government. It's theater. The fact is, we, not they, own these lands. Yet we are held in the responsible position. We are what they borrow money against. We are the surety for the debt. They have parliamentary privilege. Doesn't seem to matter what these clowns do or how nefarious it is, i.e. opening the borders to benefit a group of people that have nothing whatsoever to do with this country. We just signed some agreements, kind of like how they took India down. And this all has to get changed out. We cannot continue down this road. They wrote down what they want. They want the end of nation states. So the so-called prime minister, 5 or 6 days after taking office, states that Canada is the first post-national state. I'd like to discuss it with you further, but I got to go take some selfies and I got a pride parade to attend, so let's just leave it with you're the first post-national state. Of which, of course, the media doesn't play up much. Just like they never, not one word in any media in this entire nation on the statement of Harper, the conservative, who likes to wear a Jewish beanie hat and is in love with Israel. As you will notice, all politicians seem to be in love with Israel. Who's the puppet master? But no media never mentioned when Harper stated this, the G20, is a loss of national sovereignty. Now, he was a conservative, and the G20, which people think is this big outfit or whatever, is really just a few men. It's actually it's a private company. And one of those who was involved in creating the G20 was the Liberal Prime Minister, or ex-Liberal Prime Minister, Paul Martin. So you have a conservative at a G20 meeting set up, or helped to be set up, by a Liberal Prime Minister, and the conservative Prime Minister don't stand at the podium and call this out for what it is. No, he just goes along and says, well, it's a loss of national sovereignty. Some people don't like it, but hey, it's a simple reality. And then we have, that was 2010, and in 2015, 5 little years later, we have the new Prime Minister stating that this, our nation, is the first post-national nation. And again, very little, if any, media attention to this. But you'll never stop hearing about Black Lives Matter or the LGBTQ nonsense. You'll never hear about that. But when you study this and you go back, if you really want to do some study on your country and that, you really need to get back. You can go way, way back. But the 1200s is really a pretty good start point. I call it 1200s almost like modern history, because what went down then is still going on today. Nothing's really changed a hell of a lot. They played this game up. Well, the king can't just make all the rules and regulations, so we'll start this legislative thing. That's what we'll do. Then the people thought, well, but the king's always been the king. Well, yeah, but you can't trust the king, and it's arbitrary, so we'll set this up. And the people fell for it. And we're still falling for it. It's still kingdom. We have really no checks and balances in this country. If your party got the most votes, you pretty much do whatever they want, like open all the borders. And stateside, which I was really proud of when I was young, when I looked at the Canadian system and the American system, and they had all these checks and balances, which we didn't. And I thought, well, that's how that should run. But once the president was given executive power or executive order, that puts the president in the position of a king. So all the rest of it is just theater. So we, the people, need to take back our countries. We need to get rid of the party system, because the word party is defined as divide. And that's what the party system is there about, you fighting about which king you like the best, even though both kings are run by the same group of people, influenced from the outside, behind the curtain, whatever you want to call it. But until we, the people, decide who our representatives are from our particular areas or districts and send them to a round table, not opposing sides, so they can work together to get the best out of our people and out of our nations, we are not going to be heading anywhere good. Because you got to just understand, the idea is the end of nation states. And you got to go back to the First World War, when the American people still had a sense of integrity and worth and understanding about why they fought that War of Independence in the first place. And the idea of giving up sovereignty was not palatable to them. I don't know why people think it's palatable today. We are not one. We have a gazillion different cultures, many of them incompatible with others. It was when the world lived apart in its own place, the world was a much better place. And now they're jamming you all together, and there's a reason for that. That's chaos, and out of chaos comes order, which is what they want. Anyways, enough of that. So the Statute of Jewry was fine, and the Nameless War, look it up, take a look at it, and I guess we're out of time. We're back here Tuesday, and let me see what else I got to say. Oh yes, don't forget this. 3 o'clock, Hal behind the woodshed is up on deck, full of good information, and encouraging you, like the rest of us, stand up,
Selling lies and buying time, killing people next in line, lower classes, social slime, they don't matter, genocide, sick from water, sick from air, making money, they don't care, Caesar shit, force of air, fuck